This is Boston University's Neurophotonics podcast. My name is Sung An, a third-year PhD candidate in biomedical engineering, and I am the producer and editor of this episode of the podcast. This episode, our intelligent hosts are joined by Dr. Stefan Mihalas as he explains his journey from the field of physics and how he landed on computational neuroscience and modeling our noisy brain. He also blows our minds with how incredibly unintuitive the concept of building a brain where no two parts are identical, and how that may actually be a feature, not a bug, of our cognition. That said, thank you for tuning in, and please enjoy the episode.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Neurophotonics podcast. My name is Dora Balog. I'm a third-year biomedical engineering PhD student with a focus in computational neuroscience, and I'm here with my co-host.
Sudham Duwadi. I'm also a third-year PhD candidate in biomedical engineering department, and my research interests are also in computational neuroscience.
Yeah. Today we are talking to Dr. Stefan Mihalas. Dr. Mihalas received his previous education in mathematics and physics at the West University of Timisoara in Romania, after which he pursued his PhD in physics at the California Institute of Technology. Stefan joined the Allen Institute in 2011, where his current research interests are aimed at building models to elucidate how large networks of interactive neurons produce cognitive behaviors. Welcome, Stefan. We're happy to have you here in Boston.
Thanks.
So just to start off the interview, could you introduce yourself briefly and give a little bit of a background on your education and your career path and how you ended up at the Allen Institute?
I am Stefan Mihalas. I grew up as a kid in communist Romania, in one of those translationally symmetric neighborhoods which one can see in pictures from brutalist architecture, and was lucky enough that the communist regime fell when I was 14, just started high school. So that opened us up to a world of possibilities. I did my undergrad in physics at the local university in Timisoara, at the West University, and then followed up with a master's in differential geometry. And during that time, I also started and attended medical school for a year, but was lucky enough to get some fellowship from European Union to be able to study abroad. So I ended up going and spending 1 year of my undergrad in the Netherlands. And after that, when I finished my master's, I applied for PhDs and continued with an education. I was very interested in doing theoretical physics. I wanted to do string theory, decided against it relatively rapidly after I started my PhD. And moved my research interests more into computational neuroscience. Following that, I went to Hopkins for a postdoc, and during that time, I was very lucky to have a lot of freedom, and I think ended up doing lots of models and talking with lots of people. It was an incredibly fun time to go roam the corridors and talk with professors who were doing molecular neuroscience and constructed models of transcription factors, and ended up talking to people who are interested in perceptual organization and elements of Gestalt understanding of a scene, and build models for that. Ended up talking to people who study synaptic plasticities and build models for that. So it was an incredibly fun time to try to just talk to experimentalists and describe their intuitions into just equations. I think that has practically been very often my career, is to try to be a translator from human intuition into mathematics. They continued doing so at Allen Institute. After I started my team, I ended up doing probably too many things, just that it's fun to do them all.
I'm assuming you got into neuroscience and medical field because you were already interested in undergrad. You went for medical school. Is that correct? Or did you grow interest in neuroscience later in master's?
I was always interested in biological systems. One of the hardest parts when growing up was that I was much more interested in having the capacity to do some quantitative description of the system, and biology has never been described or taught in a quantitative manner. It has all been descriptive, which, while interesting, has generally put me a little bit away from that. So while the interest was there, learning and having the capacity to describe it more quantitatively is mainly the thing which drew me towards it later.
Yeah. So the switch from string theory to computational neuroscience is a big jump. Can you elaborate a little bit on that, of like how that transition happened, like step by step, basically?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So I have been taking, I do think that it is no longer the case that in many PhDs where you need to take lots of classes within the first year, and then to have some relatively complicated exam at the end of the first year, and you need to get a good passing grade. I do think that it was about 50% of the people who'd end up typically getting a grade which is good enough. It was not a problem because people can retake that exam, but it was still something which was relatively stressful within the first year of a PhD. So I ended up doing reasonably well in exams like these. So when talking to representatives of the physics department, when talking to that I want to change and I want to explore ideas from and build models from other fields, I think they looked at my grades and said, okay, fine, it is possible. I also ended up having a discussion with several professors and the dean who just wanted to know that there is enough knowledge of physics such that I am allowed to carry a PhD from Caltech in physics, even that I did my research theoretically with a professor from the biology department. So that was regarding the regulation. At least Caltech was really good with that. Was very open with that. The only thing which they required was to have some professors from physics in your thesis committee, and I was lucky enough to have a good relation with Skip Thorne, who ended up being in my thesis committee after that, and he was also such an amazing scientist and person. And was when I told him that I wanted to do biology, he was, "Oh, that sounds fascinating. Can I learn some about it? I would love to be in your thesis committee. I would love to learn more about that." And regarding finding a professor in another department where you don't necessarily know or do rotations or know that, ended up going through and meeting with several professors, and I don't know if it was necessarily the most logical way in which I did a choice, but I ended up talking to a professor, and in the end I chose mainly on the capacity of having the freedom to do most of the things which I wanted. I talked to several professors about some of the ideas which I had. I don't think that they were that great. And there were some professors who said, how about you do something very different? That was generally a way which would be, it was not the successful way to try to approach that. For the people who wanted to shape the ideas and to try to understand how they relate and how they can support that, that was the way I decided to choose how to pursue the next steps.
Awesome. What are some of the biggest challenges that in the ways that you ask scientific questions you started facing once you made this transition?
Well, to me, there are, I think, two very long-term trends in computational neuroscience. And I think that in one way to try to think to build towards would be to help the human conditions by curing diseases. And in the end, we need to try to think on how do we build models which are going to be relevant for that. What are the things which would be for which we can help? The second one would be quite different, which would be mainly to try to understand behavior. And in the end, the ultimate element of behavior, I would say, is to understand intelligence. And in that case, we don't necessarily need to understand a lot of the biological details of the organism. We simply need to synthesize and take some of the quintessential ideas to try to get towards a way in terms of how we think in order to be able to do that. So most of the time when building towards a project, of course, they are not going to necessarily directly relate to this. But in the end, it helps to try to think, how does one build towards that ultimate goal?
Thank you for that. I also found that you are very much interested in how neural networks give rise to the cognitive behavior. Would you help us unpack that a little bit, your insights into how you think about that?
So, of course, there are going to be relatively complicated ways to try to think ultimately towards behavior. But I think it's really necessary, because I think that too many people try to look at neuronal networks and try to look at the function of the brain. And for example, when people, very often I open papers and I read about the relation between structure and function. And in the end, function turns out to be neuronal activity. That's not actually the function of the brain. The function of the brain is for us to be able to do what we are doing now. Right? It would be somewhat difficult. We don't have yet models which are capable of doing this pretty well. But at the same time, in the end, that should be the goal, is to try to go towards behavior and to understand that. And that's, of course, complicated to do all the way to the end. But we need to simplify and to try to understand, potentially sometimes anthropomorphize, but to try to understand what would be the function of a circuit or a part of the brain. For example, it has been quite successful to try to describe one part of the visual system as trying to do object recognition. That one is described as the ventral stream of the visual system. That one means that it is near the bottom of the brain, and that particular set of areas are generally going to be involved in representing shapes around us. And from the perspective of simply trying to train artificial neuronal networks in order to do object recognition, teams have been able to see that that there are going to be similarities in terms of representation. This work has been pioneered by Jim DiCarlo's team.
Yeah, I very much agree. The function of the brain is not to produce the neural activity. It's just a modality of how we are understanding the brain, but the function is the behavior. So behavioral studies are very important. And I think Allen Institute puts you in that position where you can have experimentalists, computational professors, everybody working together, right? So do you want to touch on that experience, how Allen Institute is like a good place for doing that kind of stuff?
Oh, yes, it's fantastic. And I would have to say that there is an incredibly important cultural shift happening in science for quite some time now. I think that coming from physics, you probably do realize that there are these incredibly expensive and complicated experiments, like CERN or LIGO, which have been built, which require thousands of scientists to work together in order to be able to answer one question. I don't think that biology has fully transitioned to it, but it is important to realize the fact that it is very much a transition from the individual-driven science, where you've got this, I would say, notion of almost the explorer, the person who takes a flag and is the first one to drive things, versus the person who helps drive a team towards building new knowledge. Coming back to Kip Thorne, it was a very interesting aspect which he stated is that you probably know that he received the Nobel Prize in physics for his leadership on the LIGO project. And he told a story which I absolutely love, which is the fact that when he was called on the phone in the night from the Swedish Royal Academy to inform him about the prize, he was asked if he was surprised by this, and he said that he is, I'm paraphrasing this, that he expected the call, but he's disappointed. They think that generally people from the Nobel Committee don't hear that very often when somebody calls them and tells them that they are disappointed. And the main reason why he said that he's disappointed is that he got the Nobel Prize together with two of his colleagues when it took thousands of people to do the work. And the fact that currently science does not recognize generally the incredible contribution which are going to come from so many of the scientists which are going to be there. And that is one of the really interesting things which are happening at Allen Institute, which is the idea of team science, where the fact that it is not only going to be, it's not just one individual which drives it and comes up with an idea and there is the eureka moment and you jump from a bathtub and you discovered it. It's a long process which takes many people to build together things. And in that teams, there needs to be diversity in expertise, which are going to come. And you need to have people who think from a very experimental perspective, from a very engineering perspective, and I would say mathematicians like me who take a very theoretical approach for that. But I think that our Institute successes have been driven very much by the capacity of taking these groups and bringing them together.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think any single traditional academic institution can do what Allen Institute is doing right now. So that's pretty awesome to know.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see the transition from when in graduate school you have your one project and you maybe work in a small team or maybe have a few teams you collaborate with across universities, but then to scale it up like at the Allen Institute where you have hundreds of people working on such big projects. So what I'm wondering is, you mentioned that in physics you have thousands of people working on achieving one or like answering one question. What question would you be asking if that was a biological question and you had thousands of people working on it?
That is a fantastic question. And I actually do think that one thing which I love about biology at the moment is that I am not able to answer your question. I really do not know, particularly to just come and put down and to say, this is the question which we need to answer right now. And I think that it is beautiful because a big part of science is defining your question. I actually do think that it is going to be with the idea. I do think that I can put trends towards one would be interested in answering the question, but I wouldn't formulate it as being the question. The overarching question, which would be, I think, for the field, is what is intelligence? And that would be one aspect. And two, how can we cure diseases? I think I touched upon these two themes. But these are not well-formulated questions. If you're going to go to a PI and to say, what do you want to write your thesis on? And my answer would be, what is intelligence? That one would be I do think that you'd need to narrow the scope down a little bit and to find something. So one can try to have these goals, an Everest in mind to do that. But first you need to also know how to take some steps in that direction. And I think that at the moment we are better off not defining the one question in biology to answer, but engaging with a group of smart people and saying, these are some interesting directions. Can you define your own questions?
So sort of like creating the repository of knowledge at some point that would somewhere converge to answering what is intelligence or how can we cure it. Is that what you're trying to say?
I do think that there are potentially two ways to try to think about that, and I'm not sure if you're hinting at that. That one which is going to be with the idea of curiosity-driven science, and I would say somebody who thinks in a somewhat Popperian way of defining an hypothesis, and then going on and testing that hypothesis. And that has been the traditional way to do science, and I think is still an incredibly fun and the great way to do that. And I think that one should continue to do this. But there is a secondary approach which can be done in terms of simply collecting enormous amounts of data and try to integrate these into models which are going to try to describe this data, but which might not necessarily be easily humanly interpretable. We might have the capacity of producing an input-output relation, a descriptive model, but when one were to ask you but can you explain it to me in words on how it works? The answer might be no. We can describe how we collected the data, how we trained the system, how it optimized on these things, but then we wouldn't necessarily know how this is happening. And I think that there is a tension like this because there are the capacity to be able to build the equivalent of this type of foundational models, neuroscience, and I think both are useful. And one of my fears is that one would end up becoming much more important than the other. I still think that there is a huge role for smaller project curiosity-driven science, for larger team projects which answer well-posed scientific questions, and for foundational models which can try to do these elements together, not saying that one is more important than others.
So that's a hypothesis-driven versus data-driven approach. Is that what?
Yes.
Okay, so we can see that you have worked with all different ranges of data, starting from molecular all the way up to systems level. What is your favorite level to work with in terms of data?
Oh, it's so difficult. It's like asking somebody to pick their favorite kid. It's not there is only one correct answer, all of them. And in the end, that was a joking answer, but at the same time, to take it more seriously, really answer different questions, and it depends on the type of problem which one wants to approach, and the problems of behavior and intelligence and computation can generally be best answered at system level, and questions which relate to diseases really need a molecular basis, so they would flip the order of scales.
To touch on that systems versus molecular level, and there's a big buzz around the precision medicine, and I heard some scientists believe that broad system level of medication that we do not know where exactly to target at the molecular level could be useful, and some are very much interested in targeting specific molecules and becoming very precise for every patient. Do you have idea, or do you have leaning towards one or the other?
At the moment, I think that precision medicine requires an incredibly large amount of knowledge, which I don't know how much of that we have now. It's not my area of specialty, but my expectation is that it will probably become more important with increasing knowledge. At the same time, it would be important to make sure that one does not neglect the needs which are going to be present in terms of there is so much need in medicine, which would be not necessarily just in precision. There is a need to be able to focus and to treat so many other diseases which should not be neglected just for the flashiest, latest things in terms of precision medicine.
Talking about flashy things, there's still a big buzz around AI and artificial intelligence and what are neural networks. And I mean, we know in the ML sense of what they are, but there's also a lot of talk going around biologically inspired artificial intelligence neural networks, and your work focuses a lot on taking anatomical data, taking physiological data, and building models from that. So what is your view on the whole just like AI buzz?
I do think that it can really be one of the most important steps really in the history of humankind, in terms of up until now, humans are the most intelligent entity around, and I do not know that is going to really be maintained into the future. And personally, I do think that bio-inspired artificial intelligence is really one of the potentially most likely directions to succeed towards improving the intelligence of the current systems. And I would say that a big part of my work drives in that direction. Really, intelligence is one of the main behavioral elements of humans, so very much interested in that.
If you had to give us a teaser into at what point would we be able to call a machine an intelligent being or sentient being, what do you think about that?
You asked two questions, and may I ask for a follow-up question, because you said intelligent/sentient, and could you define those terms?
I was hoping you would help us define those terms. To narrow down my question, is there mathematical benchmarks or like some objective benchmarks that a lot of the AI companies use to say, okay, it has surpassed human level of intelligence, it is AGI. What do you think would make a machine intelligent?
Well, I do think that there are many definitions of intelligence, and I think that one which I favor is the capacity to rapidly adapt to new situations. And I do think that there is still a little bit of a gap between artificial intelligence versus human level intelligence for these things, and that gap is narrowing. And I do think that bio-inspired artificial intelligence can actually drive some of these things. One of the things which has been really surprising when coming into neuroscience from physics has been the incredible diversity of the components. So, for example, when we try to look at the brain, every single neuron is a little bit different. They also come in cell types and they are very different. But when you try to record from them, the input-output transfer function, the way a neuron processes what it does can be very different from a neuron to another. And think about it as an engineer this way, that I'll ask you to build a computer, but every single transistor which I build would be a little bit different. Or I'll ask you to build an Empire State Building, but all the bricks which I'm going to give you are going to be different from each other. How easy will it be to design and build a system this way?
Pretty hard.
Yeah.
Yeah. At the same time, that is actually how our brains are built. And it turns out that we did some studies and we looked at that, and surprisingly, this actually helps the computational power of the brain. The diversity of the types of computations which are present, as long as you know how to choose them and to pick them, it's a huge benefit, not a detriment, because you might want to pick a right element at one particular way. The one way to try to think about this in slightly more technical terms, there is the idea of temporal credit assignment, in which you can try to remember that, for example, something important from some seconds ago or a few minutes ago has been the one which was the important element which was defining what you're going to do. So in my case has been the question which you posed is trying to define the shape of my answer, even that I have been answering it for 2 or 3 minutes already. But at the same time, this type of temporal credit assignment, it's easier to do when you've got diverse neurons. So that is one thing which is going to be very different. And right now, all the artificial intelligence systems use all their neurons are identical. When we try to build some with a diverse type, we have actually been able to train them to have an easier time with this type of temporal credit assignment. Another aspect which I was really surprised is the huge amount of variability which one sees in the recordings. You present the same stimulus to an animal and you look in let's say in the visual cortex, and you see that every time when the movie is presented, the neurons respond a little bit differently. The question for that would be, how? Why? How would it happen? And again, we are building generally with the idea that is this type of noise which is viewed in there, is it a feature or a bug? And in the end, we are aiming to try to say that it is going to be a feature, and it would help animals to learn to generalize. The main reason to try to understand that everything which we do in the world is generalization, because we simply do not have the time or the capacity to be able to process the world in somewhat more similarly the way in which typical machine learning system at the moment do. Large language models are often trained on enormous amount of data which would be impossible for any human to be able to get. Yet they are not yet at the same level of intelligence as humans.
That was amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, it would make my experiments easier if the brain responded exactly the same time so that I wouldn't have to trial average 300 times. But I can see why the brain would do that, especially to generalize. And you said you didn't give my answer, but you sort of did. After 2 minutes, you weaved in back to this story. So your whole point was intelligence is more like being able to adapt to different situations. And I think you're trying to weave that into our brain. Every neuron is different, and every stimuli, the output is slightly different and helps to adapt. So that's how the brain is intelligent, but the machines are not.
Yes, but at the same time, there is still, I believe, at the moment, intelligence currently in the large language models, and there is their capacity to. I mean, it's difficult to look at that and not to say that there is an element of intelligence, but I do think that it's a little bit different than our intelligence, and also I think that at the moment we are still more intelligent. There are going to be quite a few tests which are not passed, but it's getting much closer. For somebody who has been in this field for many years, I would have to say that the current growth is incredibly rapid within the last few years.
Yeah. We're wondering also, are there any insights that you have or like intuitions that you have built coming from mathematics and physics backgrounds that you saw that people didn't have in neuroscience, or vice versa? I mean, I'm imagining when you come from a very exact science and seeing the brain respond differently every time, that must be, I mean, at least it would be for me a shocking revelation. And it was, because I was also classically trained as an engineer, and I gathered data, and the mouse was just doing what it wanted to do. I mean, of course, trial averaging does its thing, but it was just like such a transition. And I was wondering if you had a similar experience, or if you can elaborate on that.
So I would say that trying to integrate and to understand what is different about this has driven quite a lot of the research in my team. And I would say that, yes, that is one of the most important things when you switch fields and you've got knowledge from another one. Understanding and building correlations and understanding what are some of the differences and what are they driven by can be one of the biggest drivers to these types of questions, and allows one to ask potentially more peculiar questions and things which are going to be more interesting. But by the way, coming back to the reliability of neurons, I would have to come back and to say that the reliability of neurons is incredibly low in cortex. But you know that, for example, we had some recordings which have been done on an ulnar nerve, and the correlation to similar stimuli on peripheric responses can easily be more than 90, sometimes 99% on the same stimulus. So it's not that biology cannot build reliable systems. It can. It has the capacity to do that. It simply seems that evolution has found that it is more efficient to be unreliable in cortex, which is really a relatively novel invention from an evolutionary perspective as nervous systems goes. It has appeared in mammal-like reptiles for the first time, but it's mainly expanded and developed in mammals. The main reason for that is really the cortex is generally just a fantastic learning machine which drives our intelligent processes. And I think that seeing this difference not only between engineered systems and biological systems as a cortex, but also seeing it between different biological systems can be very powerful. So yes, there can be a lot to learn from switching subfields. So for example, if somebody has studied peripheric nervous systems and moves to central one, can realize, wow, that is going to be different. And I think that I've heard this saying, and I forgot from whom to give the correct credit, that the most likely words to be heard when one does a scientific discovery is not eureka, but rather, that's funny.
We agree. Been there multiple times. So in AI field, we also hear AI hallucinations a lot. And I'm like trying to draw some similarity between what you said and that. So maybe we are looking at the AI hallucinations wrong. If it's unreliable in some sense, then probably it's more creative. Do you think hallucinations probably is helping the AI learn better?
But here are going to be, let me try to delve a little bit more into the research onto what is going to be the variability which we try to see in the brain. And it's important to realize that the variability which we are seeing is not going to be variability in every single direction. Mm-hmm. Let me ask, and it might not seem related, but it will come to be related question, as in, how many images do you think can fall on your retina?
How many images?
Yeah, intuitively. I mean, you can of course compute it, but if you were to just give an intuition, if I were to present an image on your retina every millisecond, how much time would it take to see all images?
Eternity? There's like an infinite amount of images you could be projecting?
Yeah, very close. It's not exactly infinity, of course, but it's such a large number that if I were to take, it's much larger than the number of atoms in the universe times the number of femtoseconds since Big Bang. So if I were to take a retina and put it on every atom in the universe and present an image every femtosecond since then, you'll never come and see two images again. So in the end, our system cannot be about identification, cannot be as an, hey, have I seen exactly the same image? So is never. It will never happen. It will never happen again. What we need to do always is understand that some type of information is relevant and we need to keep it. And some type of information is not, and we need to erase it. And one can try to think about the noise in the brain as being the one which is going to erase the irrelevant information. And it's going to be variability in directions which are unimportant. Now, variability in directions which are important is not that good. If I'm going to start and randomly switch in this podcast in speaking other languages or just create random sounds, it wouldn't be very useful, right? So there needs to be some constraining. You can't, pure variability is not just creativity. A random Gaussian noise is not creative. It's just noise. There are going to be, in order to be able to be creative, you need to have some elements, some constraints to realize what is important, to be variable in some particular directions. And I don't know if I would call hallucinations necessarily going to be variability in there. I think that it might simply be noise in coding directions. It might simply be elements which are going to be unuseful from this perspective. I don't think that everything which is going to be variable is automatically creative.
Thank you. That was a great way to put that together.
Yeah. Do we want to transition into a short Q&A question there? We're just going to ask you very quick questions. You can just like rapid fire answer them. They're a little bit like either creative or just like aimed towards like graduate students like figuring out their career paths. So just to start off, if you had an unlimited amount of resources and time, what dream model or simulation would you love to build?
I would like to build some element of a foundational model for the mind, but in which is going to be biologically inspired computation, not necessarily fully biologically realistic, but having the capacity to do coarse graining from lower level systems towards all the way to system level understanding.
Cool. So next question for you. What's something in neuroscience that you believed 10 years ago, but now you've changed your mind? It could be fact or approach.
In terms of approaches, I do think that I was very interested in purely data-driven models about 10 years ago, and realized that we'll never have enough data in order to be able to build on purely data-driven models. One would need to always add some elements of coarse graining or some elements of function to simultaneously do that.
Okay. So now a little bit more of a personal or like professional development question. So students who have started the same type of path in mathematics or physics, but are looking to transition into neuroscience, what advice would you give to them? Is there anything any type of skill that they should be focusing on, or?
I would say that it's very important to learn to listen. And many biologists already understand the system which they are working on to an incredibly great level. To say that one of the earlier projects which I started during my postdoc have been incredibly successful for mainly translating into equations the intuition which the PI, in that case it was David Ginty, had about the system. I mainly worked as a translator necessarily than that, and it taught me so much about the capacity to understand the system. So it does not require one person to necessarily write the particular equations for the system for them to understand it. And if you come from mathematics or physics, you will have the capacity to write this, but you're highly unlikely to have these intuitions and these elements of understanding. Do talk to people who have that and listen to them.
That's a great piece of advice. So, fun question. When you're not modeling neurons, how do you unwind? How do you recharge? How do you recover? And how do you stay inspired so that you wake up next day and do more modeling of neurons?
I do lots of things. So I have pastime. I like skiing. So going to when there are somewhat longer breaks, I go and like skiing. I also do have a family and like to spend time with them, and try to do in the not copious time which is left. There are several things, from trying to read a few books here and there, watch some TV series, and sometimes play computer games. Sometimes it's interesting to sometimes go back to old games which I loved from 20 years ago and say, hey, just found that. Let me try to see. Let me try to remember some things from that.
Yeah, we love nostalgia here, or at least I do.
Yeah, she's an avid skier herself.
Yeah, I'm also trying to ski a little bit here and there.
So thank you very much for doing this podcast with us, and thank you for being very humble and very much weaving the stories and ideas together to form this beautiful conversation with us.
Thank
Absolutely.
you. Yeah, awesome.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening. If you liked this episode and want more like it, please take a moment to share it with anyone you think would enjoy it too. Next time, we will be wrapping up our season as we look forward to the changes we'll be making to the podcast to give you, our listeners, a more pleasurable listening experience. This episode was made possible by the support of Boston University's Neurophotonics Center and listeners like you. Thank you.